Good evening. We're going to call the meeting to order. This is the City of Eastpointe Board of Ethics meeting called to order today, Tuesday, December 13th, 2022 at 6:15 p.m. We do apologize for the late start, but we're going to go ahead and begin with a roll call.
All right, good evening. Board Chair Muniz?
Here.
Board Member Jones? Vice Chair Sasek?
Here.
Board Member Tubman?
Here.
Board Member Wilson?
That was
You
Board
have
Member
Jones.
Lloyd, not Jones.
I know, it's like,
It
this feels
just
weird.
registered.
Board Member Lloyd, my apologies.
That's why I looked around and said, huh?
Yeah.
Can you call that again?
Board Member Lloyd?
Here.
All right, thank you. Now that we know who's supposed to be here, and that's on all of us. Okay. Next is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move that we approve tonight's agenda.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
All right. Calling of the roll?
Vice Chair Sasek?
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd?
Yes.
Board Member Tubman?
Yes.
Board Chair Muniz?
Yes. All right, at this time, we will have the hearing of the public. We would like to open the floor for the public. If you would like to make any public comment, please come to the podium. Please be reminded that you will have 3 minutes, and we look forward to hearing what you want to share with us tonight. Well, seeing that there's no members of the public desiring to speak at this time, we're going to move forward with the approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion regarding the minutes?
I'll move that we approve the minutes from the Board of Ethics meeting held on August 23rd, 2022.
Is there a second?
I second that motion.
All right, roll.
Vice Chair Sasek?
Yes.
Board Member Tubman?
Yes.
Board Chair Muniz?
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd?
Yes.
Next, we'll move on to unfinished business, review and approval of the proposed bylaws. At this time, are there any questions or concerns that we want to raise at this point with respect to the proposed bylaws? And for now, we'll just deal with the bylaws, and then we'll deal with the ordinance recommendation separately.
Personally, I feel that the bylaws are definitely acceptable now. We did have an issue initially where it talked about a secretary being an elected member of the board, and they took that language out. So I'm perfectly content with the bylaws the way they read now.
Any other thoughts or comments? I do have a couple of corrections. I noticed that we completely removed information pertaining to the secretary with the exception of section 5. It still mentions the secretary. And I think that the correct thing would be for that to say city manager or city administration shall keep the records, because that's actually who's doing the record keeping for us, as well as preparing the agenda and meeting. So I would make a motion at this point that we amend section 5. And I don't know if a motion is necessary, or if, since we're just doing discussion over this.
Madam Chair, I'd recommend a motion.
Okay.
Yes.
So I would like to make a motion that we amend section 5 of the draft to say city administration, or the city manager and its appointed administration shall keep the minutes and records of the board, prepare the agenda of regular and special meetings with the chairperson, provide notice to members, arrange proper and legal notice of hearings, attend to correspondence of the board, and such other duties as are normally carried out by the secretary. And we can still keep that last sentence about board records, including agenda minutes, oaths, of office and records and decisions shall be preserved and kept on file for 20 years. Along with that, I would also make a motion that we include section 6 again, but have it to say the chair and city manager shall execute documents in the name of the board.
I'll support that.
All right. Calling of the roll?
Board Chair Muniz,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sasek,
Yes.
Board Member Tubman,
Yes.
and Board Member Lloyd.
Absolutely, yes.
And then on that, I would like to have just a brief discussion for clarity, because we may need to add to we need to add to either section 5 or section 6 with respect to this. What happens in the event that both the chair and the vice chair, are not available for a meeting? Technically, we would still have a quorum as long as 3 members attend. So who then would chair the meeting since we don't have a secretary?
The most senior member.
Okay. So I think I would then like to make a motion that we include language that would address an occasion where either both the chair and vice chair are both absent, that the most senior member of the board then be permitted to chair the meeting. Is there a second to that?
I can support that.
All right, calling of the roll?
Board Chair Muniz,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sasek,
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd,
Yes.
and Board Member Tubman.
Yes.
And then going down to Article 5, Section 2. Actually, before we go there, if we can go to Article 7, Section 4. It says a document prepared, owned, used, in possession of, or retained by the board in the performance of an official function shall be made available to the public in compliance with Michigan's Freedom of Information Act. I'm glad that it now specifies the Freedom of Information Act, but I would like to make a motion that the language be changed to any document subject to FOIA, prepared, owned, used, in the possession of, or retained by the board in the performance of an official function shall be made available to the public in compliance with the Michigan FOIA Act. And the reason for that qualification is because not all documents would be subject to FOIA. So I think it needs to be clear for anyone coming along and reading this that it's the documents that are subject to FOIA. That makes sense on my motion. I know I just made a motion with a whole lot, but is there a second? If not,
I
then
just wondered if Mr. Albright has a comment on that. Is that an appropriate motion?
It would be an appropriate motion just for more clarity. The proposed language would cover that. However, because it does say shall be made available to the public in compliance with Michigan's Freedom of Information Act. So that language there recognizes that there are exceptions where documents would not be subject to disclosure, but if the board feels that it believes that that would provide additional clarification for someone perhaps seeking to obtain a document, the board is certainly within its right to do so.
What's your question?
my motion would stand as I stated it, simply because I want to make sure that anything that we put out to the public is very clear from the onset. And also so that when future boards come along, if they're reading this, they are able to clearly see what their limits are from the get-go, and maybe eliminate the need to make a phone call to ask for clarity if it's written right at the onset. So is there,
I'll second that.
all right, calling of the roll?
Board Chair Muniz,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sasek,
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd,
Yes.
and Board Member Tubman.
Yes.
Lastly, I'd like to make a motion that we table to our next meeting discussion pertaining to the ombudsperson as outlined in Section 2-202, But the reason why I'm mentioning it now, while we're not talking about the ordinance just yet, the ombudsperson is mentioned in Article 5, Section 2 of our proposed bylaws. And so I would like to make a motion that we come back for another discussion pertaining to the inclusion of an ombudsperson before we finalize the bylaws.
I have a question. Do you feel that there's something that's missing that you want to talk about more?
It's more a question of whether or not an ombudsperson is necessary. And so there's that whole discussion I would like us as a board to be able to have when all sides are prepared to discuss it, whether or not we feel that, because as it stands right now, an ombudsperson has always been listed in the bylaws, but we've not had one. The question becomes, is it a necessity? And as it's written out, and I know we've spent some, right, and I know we've spent some extensive time, researching it, trying to get language right, but I really kept coming back to the question of what's the necessity of this? If you have a board of 5 peers, then why do we have an ombudsperson? And is that necessary? And I'm not saying that it is or isn't, I'm just saying I think we need to further explore that before we solidify the bylaws.
Absolutely, and that was my concern as well.
So my motion is, can we table the discussion pertaining to the ombudsperson as outlined in Article 5 and subsequently table the discussion pertaining to the ordinance recommendations until our next meeting? Is there a second to that?
Second and support.
All right, calling of the roll?
Board Chair Muniz,
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sasek,
Yes.
Board Member Tubman.
Yes.
So now is where we can have a little bit of discussion about it now that we've gotten the motion out the way. Because it's hard to do the motion first and then not do your discussion right then and there. So just as a matter of discussion, my encouragement to our board would be to go back and really look at not only the role of the ombudsperson, but how that would really function administratively with respect to what we provide as a board, what city administration already provides in their management of the city and of employees and of boards and council, and determine whether or not having a whole nother party is necessary, or is this board of 5 residents sufficient to handle that duty, especially if we have representation of legal counsel. So, were there any questions on it?
One of the questions I have, and I think if I express it tonight and we can get the information tonight, it'll make it easier when we come back.
Right.
But when I was looking at the code and the area specifically about the ombudsman, it says that the ombudsman would receive compensation. And so I'm assuming that compensation would only be given for the amount of time that they're actually working in the capacity of the ombudsman, as opposed to the ombudsman is now a part of the city administration and they're getting a salary. So that's where I need some clarification. Is it a salary position or a pay by the amount of time that you spend?
Mr. Albright, can you give any clarity?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think that this would probably be a contractual independent contractor type of situation, because this person's role is not going to be required on a day-to-day basis. It's more of a as requested or as necessary basis. So I would think that it would be a person who would work either for a flat fee retainer over over a period of 12 months, or it would be somebody who would charge an hourly rate and would just submit the bill to the city for any services rendered.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, do we have an idea of how much money we're going to pay if this is passed an ombudsman?
That ultimately would be something that would be decided by the city council as a legislative body. This would be a recommendation to make these changes, and then the city council would ultimately have the last say. They would then have to schedule this matter for a first and second reading during a regularly scheduled meeting of the city council. And again, the issue of compensation would certainly come up during that period of time, as the city council, as a legislative body, is responsible for setting compensation rates.
Do we have a range of how much they normally get paid?
Unfortunately, I do not. I would
Okay.
say municipal rate, it would probably depend on the person's level of expertise, but anywhere from perhaps $95 an hour upwards.
And do we have yet an example of another city? I know we had examples before of other, like universities having an ombudsperson, that sort of thing, but those institutions don't necessarily have a board of ethics. Do we have another municipality that we could point to say, hey, they've done this, they've tried it with an ombudsperson and with an existing board?
Yeah, that's a great question. I checked, and I could not find any of the communities in the surrounding area that have utilized the services of an ombudsman. So if the city of Eastpointe decided to go and have somebody act in that capacity, I believe it would be, we would be a front runner. It would be a first for communities in this area.
One more question. How would the role of the ombudsman differ from that of a mediator or conciliator?
It comes
Or
down to,
arbitrator?
yeah, it comes down to a matter of title. Basically, they're performing the same function, but with a mediator, typically they're not subject to confidentiality, whereas an ombudsman, they're subject to rules of confidentiality. Somebody confides in them, they can't be compelled to say what that person told them, much like in an attorney-client privilege situation.
So what would be the qualifications? I know during the last meeting, I asked if you suggested that this person be an attorney, and you said no, but what would be the qualifications of an ombudsperson?
Yeah, there is a group that for instance, that universities take from, and they have qualifications just for communication skills, dispute resolution, something along those lines. But the requirement that they're an attorney, that is not a requirement.
But it wouldn't be just the average Joe becoming an ombudsman for the city.
I would think not. I think they would have to have some level of expertise in working out differences amongst groups of people. For instance, there's a resolution center in Mount Clemens. It's a service that's provided to the community free of charge, and those people have experience in just trying to resolve differences between, for instance, neighbors and also parties that are subject to litigation. And I know they're very good at what they do. They do provide a valuable service.
Thank you.
So, if I can add a personal note, I would say the provision of a mediator, conciliator, arbitrator in most situations where you have a contention, they do provide a good service. I actually have a degree in it, so it is a good service. That being said, my concern would be the necessity if the function and the role of this board is to be that impartial body that not only resides in the city but can look at an issue, evaluate the issue, investigate the issue, and then merely make a recommendation for the resolution of that issue. It makes the role of the ombudsperson to me, I guess, seem a little bit redundant. And so I don't want to make this body ineffective unless we're saying we no longer need a board of ethics. Because that, as a citizen, that would be my next thing. Like, well, if we're going to pay for somebody to mediate concerns of ethics, then why do we have a board? And so I guess if there's a way we can answer that question for residents, I want us to be able to answer that. If we have a clear answer that no, it's necessary because of X, Y, and Z.
Madam Chair, if I could add
Yes.
too, since we are going to be tabling this discussion to a later meeting, perhaps if we this evening schedule the next meeting of this body, and then at the city council meetings leading up to that particular meeting, I can announce during my report section that the board is going to be meeting, and they're going to be discussing whether an ombudsperson would be a benefit to the city, and for adding to this proposed ordinance recommendation, and encourage people from the public to attend the next meeting to give their opinion on what they feel would be appropriate or not as a taxpayer and someone living in the city.
My last question on that,
Yeah.
Madam Chair, was about the residents, and you made me think about that. Hypothetically, will that person be a resident of the city of Eastpointe if it's passed, or
Not necessarily.
not necessarily?
Not necessarily.
And then I have one final question that keeps niggling at the back of my mind. It's a two-part question. One, currently, if there is an issue that arises that is not resolved within the various bodies that currently exist, who then does the city turn to? Is there an arbitration system in place that, okay, we can't, get along here, so this is who we go to be a neutral third party? And then the second part of that is, how is the role of the ombudsperson, since we are talking about people who are personnel of the city or volunteer board commission members of the city? How does the role of the city manager differ in terms of providing that third party that would hear the complaints and resolve it?
Yeah. Over the years, the city manager's office and the city attorney's office have participated in neighbor disputes. Perhaps it's something, because we deal with neighbor disputes too over at the district court too, when someone's charged with a crime, for instance, trespassing. But if it's something that hasn't risen to that level of seriousness yet, that it's an actual crime, I know there have been numerous times over the years where I have sat down in the city manager's office with a resident to discuss a problem that they were experiencing, and we just informally try to come up with some options that the person may be able to pursue. And if we're not able to do that, then they may have to resort to litigation, hiring an attorney to help them resolve their disputes. What the ombudsman person does, if this is something that the city wants to do, is a level of confidentiality. As we represent the city council, the city, but the city council is technically our client, and the city manager, of course, is answerable to the city council. That type of confidentiality, since we owe a duty to our client, who is the city council, we can't promise someone that if you tell us something, we'll keep it from our client. We just can't do that. Whereas the ombudsperson, they're able to do that.
So then, that leads to another question, though. Is the ombudsperson that we're talking about in our ordinance just for ethics issues, or is this going to be a citywide use ombudsperson? So someone who would be on tap for any issue that the city might present where a neutral third party is necessary?
Yeah, I think that the city can certainly set the boundaries on what the ombudsperson's role would be. Oftentimes, that person may not know what the person who's coming to see them is going to discuss until they actually sit down with them and hear from them and then make an assessment at that point. But if the city does not want that to turn into something where, as opposed to an independent contractor who's maybe utilized a couple of times a year, suddenly, they're looking to set up office space here at City Hall because there's so many people that want to utilize their services. The next thing you know, there's this additional substantial cost to the city. So perhaps the scope of the ombudsperson's services or role should be or can be narrowed to limit what they would be responsible for.
Which leads to one more question, and Mr. Stacy, I'm let up off of it. So, because the next question, there's all these questions that keep firing off the more we talk about this, even pertaining to civil service rules and regulations, and how this might cross the line when it comes to that. So it seems like, at least from where I'm sitting, this may need to be a very narrowly scoped position. Otherwise, I could see the potential for it really crossing over other lines within city government that we really don't want to get in the business of crossing. But maybe I'm thinking too big on it.
And that's why I think that the ombudsperson should have a certain level of expertise to identify that potential conflict, so that they don't start, stepping over the line and getting into, collective bargaining, negotiations, and dispute resolutions in those fields.
So upon reflection from our last meeting in that, and just looking at everything within, I was looking at the ombudsman position quite a bit because of the fact that it actually takes up a fairly good amount of space within our code. And initially, when we were first talking about it, I felt that the ombudsman would be a good position to have to weed out what should be coming before us and what's not coming before us. But the more I've looked at it, I really think it's not necessarily a position that we need to address. We haven't been abused as a body with frivolous information and that. And I just think that if you can keep the layers at a lesser amount, it just makes it easier for transparency, to know what's going on in that. And I've kind of gone 180 from where I was back in August even, and I really don't believe it's a position that we need to be counting on. I think as a body, we should be able to deal with whatever would be coming before us. And again, anything that comes before us goes through the scrutiny of the city manager's office.
Right.
So again, I'm willing to discuss it at our next meeting, but I'm not as strongly in favor of it as I thought I was back in August.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
And the beauty of this is if the board decides not to include in its recommendation of ordinance changes an ombudsperson, perhaps maybe 2 years from now, 3 years from now, that person may be suitable.
Right.
And fill a need at that time. So it's something that the board can always revisit in the future.
Exactly.
Just because it's not being added at this time doesn't mean that it's time barred for eternity.
Well, I think it definitely would be good to see if the public has an opinion.
Yes.
They may not, but I definitely would be interested to see what my fellow residents think of whether or not they feel that it's necessary or not, especially given the fact that the reinstallation of this board is still kind of fresh. And there's still some people that don't fully understand the function of this. So good discussion for our next meeting. That being said, we're going to move on to new business. We have a complaint that we received. It was received by the city manager's office in September 8th, 2022. And this is a complaint made by Matthew Schonert. It's being filed against Mayor Monique Owens. And I believe the entire board has had an opportunity to review the complaint. Before we get into a discussion on the sufficiency of the complaint, I have one all-important question that I've kind of vowed I will probably ask from here on out as long as I'm on this board. And that is, are there any jurisdictional barriers to our investigation of this complaint?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
It's definitely addressed within the code, so.
Right, yeah, I just want to make sure that there are no jurisdictional barriers to our hearing it. Because
Right.
we have had meetings before where we've spent an extensive amount of time having conversation, and then later it being determined that our conversation was totally unnecessary, and I am not in the mood to waste
I'll second
precious
that.
moments of my life. All right, so that being said, I don't know, what, Mr. Albright, maybe you can give us some, city manager, Walton, maybe you guys can give us some direction. What would be the best route to proceed with this complaint? Is the complainant here? Would it be appropriate to hear from the complainant at this point, or?
If the board chooses to do so, yes.
So how would you all as a board like to proceed? Do you-
I
I would like to hear.
feel it needs to be investigated.
Now, can I say something before we proceed with the complainant? Because this same gentleman made 2 complaints against my wife. My wife ran for city council a year ago. My wife, neither myself, have a desire to run for elected office. Fast forward a year later, and he recently filed 2 complaints against my wife. My attorney said that it was harassment. I made it, the information available to the city. The city attorney suggested that I recuse myself from this portion of the meeting in light of the fact that this same gentleman filed the complaint, 2 complaints against my wife. And that's what I'm going to do,
Okay.
recuse myself. And the city manager suggested that I mention this at this point to put it on record.
No,
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely.
And if those complaints come before us, then, we'll address it at that time. And if not, then it's water under the bridge as far as this board should be concerned.
Absolutely. And I don't want to be, biased or anything of that nature. So I'm going to take the advice of city attorney and my attorney and recuse myself.
Thank
Yeah.
you. So I would like to make a motion at this point that we proceed with the hearing to determine the sufficiency of the complaint. Is there a second?
Support. Well,
Calling of the roll.
Ms. Tu.
Calling of the roll?
Board Chair Muniz,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sasek,
Yes.
Board Member Tubman,
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd, abstain.
Sustain.
All right. So with that being said, Mr. Schonert, we would like to give you an opportunity if you have anything in addition to your written complaint that you would like to share with us at the podium.
I actually do not have any additional statements to make, but I'm willing to answer any questions if you have any. Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah. And even if your desire is to restate your complaint, you're more than welcome to do that. I don't want to limit you on what you want to
Okay.
say.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to what I've already stated in the complaint. I think everything necessary is included, so that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Are there any questions of Mr. Schonert before we proceed?
Yes, Mr. Schonert, I have a question.
Mhm.
When I first read this, my first thought was, do you, in submitting this complaint, do you have any hint or suspicion of improprieties?
I do not. I'm not alleging that there have been any conflicts of interest or anything like that. It's just that my understanding was that it's to be filed every year, and it appeared that that was not done.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have any.
Thank you, Mr. Schulman.
Thank you.
I would like to ask a couple questions, and I don't know if these questions are better directed at City Manager Walton or City Attorney Albright. But one of the first questions I have is who's responsible for enforcement of the provision of annual disclosure statements?
That's a good question. It's never come up before. I'm checking.
I
right
had
now.
the same question, so.
I'm checking right now.
In my understanding, it's the city clerk and the city manager's office. That is to keep track on who's bringing it in, who's not, who's behind.
So they're responsible, you're saying your understanding is that the city manager and city clerk is responsible for maintaining the records?
Yes, that's
Right.
what I've read. I was reading Michigan.gov,
Okay.
and that's what was stated.
So then that still leads though to that question of, while they may be responsible for obtaining the records, who's responsible for enforcement, or maintaining the records? Who's responsible for enforcement to see that the record is provided? Is that a matter where city council itself is responsible for saying, hey, we need to make sure we submit these? Is that the governing body? Is it the city attorney? Is this a place where we need an ombuds person?
I think that just as again, this issue has never come up before, but I think that just as a default position, it would probably fall on the city attorney to notify a particular officer or employee who does not file that annual disclosure to remind them that they need to do so. And if they don't, I suppose then that there could be a violation of the ethics code, or perhaps the city council could take some type of action against that person.
And so then that leads to the next question. Has the mayor been notified that this disclosure has not been provided in a timely fashion?
Yes, so once this was filed, she also received the complaint and then provided additional copies as well. My understanding was that prior to the office changing over, that those records were supplied, so we supplied additional forms. We have not received those to date yet.
So I'm assuming that actually the city manager's office or somebody within that office would be responsible for just reminding city council. And this was another area that I wasn't too clear on in the code as well, because the code specifically says elected and or appointed members within the city. So I'm assuming, because I know as a Parks Commission member and as an Ethics Board member, I've been filing disclosure statements as well, because we've been appointed to these positions. So we fall under that same guideline, I'm assuming. And my concern is that when you're in a position of leadership, then it's your responsibility to lead by example. Ergo, the mayor and the city council specifically should be making sure that their disclosures are done every year as a means of supporting the fact that it's in our ethics code, it's required that this is done, and if we're asking our boards and commission members to provide these disclosures, we need to be on top of it as well. And again, I don't know what recourse we have due to the fact that it is mentioned as a violation of the ethics code, but it doesn't really allude to what the follow-up would be.
I have one more question. Do we know if all other members of council have complied with this disclosure?
I would have to review. I haven't gone through for every member since 2017. I think that was the date that was mentioned in the complaint. For every member that was appointed for every year since then, I'd have to do a complete audit. I also wasn't here during the time, so we could certainly review that and get that information over to the board.
So you'll do it not just for council, but for all boards and commissions?
Yes.
And again, I mean, realistically, we're dealing with this particular complaint. If there were complaints filed against other members or that, then we would certainly be addressing those at that time. But I don't think we can lump everything all together because it's separate issues. It may be the same issue, but involving different people that were not included in the original complaint.
I will mention too, there is a part of the ordinance that does mention a failure to file the disclosure statement does not release the elected officer from responsibility. So that is listed if they are not, but they are still held to the same standard.
So their failure to file doesn't release them from the obligation?
Correct.
Well, I believe, and I want to make sure that I'm correct on this, I believe we have to make a determination as to the sufficiency of the complaint tonight, because I believe in order for us to be in compliance with subsection K, it says the board shall conduct a hearing within 90 days after receipt by the city clerk to review the sufficiency of the complaint, and if the complaint is deemed sufficient to allege a violation, to determine based on a preponderance of the evidence that the respondent has violated section 2-101 of this ordinance, based on the evidence presented by the complainant and any additional evidence provided to the board at the hearing pursuant to its investigatory powers. The board may reasonably extend the time to conduct a hearing as it deems necessary to properly fully adjudicate the sufficiency of the complaint. So that being said, do I have a motion on how we want to proceed with this complaint?
Well, my thought is that this complaint is verified and that the mayor is not in compliance, and anyone else who has not submitted their disclosure annually is in non-compliance. So I think it is appropriate to accept this complaint as it is.
I'm inclined to agree with that. I mean, the complaint is in line with the ethics code.
Mm-hmm. So how would you like to proceed? Because once I guess we need to, so is the motion that we want to determine that there is a sufficient finding to determine that there's been a violation? So is that the motion?
Yes,
Yes.
I make a motion that there is a violation of this code.
That there's sufficient evidence
Yes,
of the
there is
complaint.
sufficient evidence for that.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Calling of the roll?
Board Member Tubman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sasek,
Yes.
Board Chair Muniz,
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd. Abstain.
Abstain.
Okay, so then under section L of the code, it says the board's ruling on the sufficiency of the complaint and a finding or lack thereof of a violation by the preponderance of the evidence may include, but is not limited to, one or more of the following actions. And it outlines the various actions that this board can take based upon the fact that we have made a finding of that there is sufficient evidence of a violation under our code. So I don't know if you all want to make a determination now based on subsection L and M, or if we need to review it and get the information. I don't know if you even feel like the information from the city is necessary at this point with respect to other members of council, boards, and commissions having been in compliance?
I think it's apples and oranges at this point. I know it's under the sun, but they were not a part of the complaint. So and again, if that is brought before us, then we can address it at that time. But I don't think we can lump everything together. I think we have to take it as it was presented to us. And that's where I'm a little troubled right now, because we went through a pandemic, especially in 21 and coming into 22, where I could see where possibly it got missed at that time. It's still not an excuse, because they're in a position where they know that since they've supposedly been elected officials in that, they've been signing a disclosure. We've been signing disclosures, but I suspect that I don't know that there's legitimately a disclosure for every year that I've been either on Parks or on Ethics Commission. I know I've filed at least 2, so. And that's where I really don't know what direction we need to be going with this.
I do have a question, if I could ask this time. Mr. Albright, is it possible for this board to take the opportunity and extend the time to make a finding as to how to proceed, so that we can essentially go back and then review and take under advisement all of our options pursuant to the ordinance?
I believe the board could table that decision, yes, essentially take it under advisement.
So I would like to make a motion that the board take under advisement our determination on how to proceed now that we have found that there's sufficient information in the complaint. And at our next meeting, make a determination as to what our findings will be pursuant to subsections L and M.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Advisement from who?
It would be advisement from the sense of us going back, fully going over the ordinance, and then if we have questions for the city attorney, being able to have that discussion with the city attorney. If we feel that there's a conflict of interest, we can request that the city provide outside counsel as they've previously done. Of course, we'll, have to request approval for that, but, yeah, I think, so my concern is that I want us to make not just a decision, but an appropriate decision, and a decision that will hold for all things going forward. I don't want us to just make a decision tonight. We've had this, and maybe it's because of the newness of our board, maybe it's because everybody's trying to come to terms with how we function. But as I said at the outset, I don't want us to waste time. I want to make sure that any decision we make is a grounded decision, so that even future decisions, especially since we don't know that we won't get more complaints on this. We don't know that there aren't more members of the council, of boards, of commissions who are also not in compliance, and that future complaints might come. So whatever decision we make tonight will set a precedence for future decisions. And I just want to make sure that our decision is grounded, well-founded, so that it's not later overturned or questioned.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, for clarifying that. I appreciate that. Well, I second that motion to table.
And can I just ask a clarification? Am I correct in assuming that board members and commission members are under the obligation to be signing a disclosure every year as well?
Yes, and I believe in the past that actually, though, those forms went out by by city administration. I know they just recently went out, Ms. Underwood sent them out to the people that are affected and under duty to sign those forms.
All right. Calling of the roll?
Thank you.
Board Chair Muniz,
Yes.
Board Member Tubman,
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd,
Abstain.
Vice Chair Sasek.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to move forward to a discussion on the ethics conference. I had a meeting this past week with Crystal Phillips. I think it's Crystal, I'm pronouncing it wrong. Crystal Phillips. She is the executive director for the Board of Ethics for the City of Detroit. She reached out to me and to the city manager's office requesting to meet with me to discuss a possible collaboration for a Board of Ethics conference that she would like to put together. And so we had a very good meeting. In that meeting, we talked about a few different things. One of the things is that she's looking at having this ethics meeting in the spring of 2023. We don't have any for sure dates yet. It's just all idealistic at this point, but she has been talking to the various surrounding municipalities, trying to see how the various different boards work, and get input on what kind of conversations need to be had, what kind of things do boards of ethics need training on, anything from, conflicts of interest to making sure that what we do as a board doesn't overstep what administration does, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the conversation varies dependent on the municipality, because different municipalities operate differently. Some have a strong mayoral system, others have a system in place like ours where the city manager has the day-to-day run of administration. So how each board functions is going to be different, but there is a continuity of things that we deal with as boards. And so the hope is that we can collaboratively come together, have those discussions, bring in some experts who can train us. I just wanted to share that with you guys. As more information comes from her office, I will share that with this body. One of the other things that we discussed, she is hosting a parliamentary procedure training in January for her staff, but she has made an invitation that we can come as members of public to that. And I know that our city held that earlier this year. It was a very successful training. If you guys didn't get to attend, I encourage you, if you get an opportunity, especially if you hear that Coco is teaching it, please make sure that you participate, because she's a wealth of knowledge, very well laid out, definitely helps you. I would be lying if I said I don't feel like I need that training every time we come to a meeting. So anyway, that will be, I think right now it's tentatively scheduled for January 28th, which is a Saturday. So as more information comes out about that meeting, I will make this body aware and share that. And then she also shared with me about a more international or global conference, ethics conference, that apparently the City of Detroit's Board of Ethics, and I'm not sure what other boards, has been attending annually for several years, and they send their members to. So it's called COGEL, C-O-G-E-L, the Council on Governmental Ethics Laws. And I did send a link in an email to this board if you guys would like to check that out. I think it would be helpful for this board, if the city is going to keep this body in existence, then as much training as we as members of this body can get, the better, because then we can better serve our city, better serve the residents of this city. And being that we've been on this board now since its inception for the last couple of years, this go round, and there has not been a lot of opportunities for training. So when we find something that appears to be a gold mine, I think we need to look at asking City Council to invest in us so that it's subsequently an investment in our city. And there's information there. I have also forwarded that link and information to the city manager's office so that they have it. And if in the future we should decide to approach city council about one or two or the whole board participating at one of those conferences, the membership information and all of that is there. Any questions about my meeting with Ms. Phillips?
No, I had a chance to go to the website, and I think it's absolutely phenomenal. Started back in 1974, so they got longevity, and I think it'll be a tremendous benefit for this board.
So we missed out on Quebec. I was like, really?
We probably would have missed out on Quebec no
Right,
matter what.
anyway. But my understanding, I believe the next meeting may be in Kansas City, Missouri, possibly. I think that's right. So that's a little bit closer, a little, little less trouble to arrive at. All right. At this time, we're gonna roundtable for board member comments. So
Should we maybe pick a meeting date
yes,
first? and then
yes,
do-
that would be good. So do we have a motion for a next meeting date? And this is where we will need the city manager's help because we want to make sure we don't cross into any other meetings. Can you tell us what the month of January and February look like in terms of potential meeting dates?
Yes, so we're looking at Tuesdays. So January 3rd, we have council. The 10th, we have council as well, and the 17th. We're also looking at scheduling a capital meeting on the 24th, so it may be best to move into February, the beginning of February. Unless you wanted to try a different day of the week, but it seems.
I know that board member Lloyd has a continuing conflict on Tuesdays. Tuesdays work for me, but I know that he does have a conflict and has to get a stand-in for his scheduling conflict on Tuesdays. How do the other board members feel?
I can pretty much be open almost any day.
I'd say any day except Wednesday.
So I have a standing conflict on Wednesdays and Thursdays.
So we're at Monday.
So we're at Monday.
Monday or Tuesday.
I know I'm gonna be out of the country next month,
Okay.
so February may be good for me.
Right. So what are we looking at in February in terms of potential
6th,
meetings
13th,
on
20th, or
Mondays or
27th.
Tuesdays?
No, not the 20th, it's President's Day.
Right.
So 6th, 13th, or 27th.
That's correct.
Are those all available at this point?
1 second, let me check with Otis on school.
Yeah, when does Planning Commission meet? But no,
Yes.
school board.
Yeah, and planning commission, we meet on Thursday.
School boards meet on Monday.
Yeah.
February 6th.
Yes, February 6th would work.
Okay,
How was that for everybody?
yes.
No, did you say February 6th is school board or not school board?
No, February 13th and 27th, it looks like a school board.
Oh,
So
okay.
February 6th would be open for council chambers.
I'm available the 6th.
All right. So we want to do February 6th?
Yes, that's good for me.
And was a 6 o'clock good? I know
Yes.
board member Wilson liked 6:30.
Well,
I'm amenable to 6:30.
so am I.
Mhm.
Okay.
So 6:30, February 6th.
I'm definitely open now.
Thank you, Mr. Stacey, for helping us
No
remove me to do
problem.
that. That, which leads to another question. For our next agenda, we just need to make sure to just put it as a line item in there, a select date for next meeting. So I'll have to remember that. Okay, at this point, we're going to move forward with board member comments. We'll begin with Ms. Tubman.
I really don't have a comment other than to say I'm glad to be back with you. I'm sorry I missed the last meeting. It was Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone. And thank you, Attorney Albright, and thank you, Ms. Walton, for your constant help. Thank you. It's very appreciated.
Board Member Lloyd?
I'm excited about being a part of the Ethics Board for the city of Eastpointe. I think this is a phenomenal city. I think we have a great council. I didn't get a chance to finish my statements earlier. You know, how my wife ran for city council last year. She didn't win, but we wholeheartedly support the entire council and the mayor. And we support the city manager, city attorney, and we're just glad to be a part of the team. Teamwork, it makes the dream work, and I appreciate all of our board members. That's it.
Vice Chair Stacy?
This one was interesting for me tonight, well, since we got it, because, I'm not 100% sure that anybody deliberately hasn't filed a disclosure statement. So I think due diligence on all of our parts. I know myself personally, in regards to parks, I've been trying to keep on top of it as well. And I really appreciate working with everybody. I think we're a very diverse and well-organized group. And hopefully this can be resolved so that moving forward, everybody's on the same page and we're not having a repeat issue. And I'd like to wish everybody a blessed and happy holiday season. That's all I have tonight. Thank you.
All right, awesome. I just want to, first of all, just say how much I appreciate the day-to-day operators of the city of Eastpointe. I can't say enough what an excellent job I think our administration and all of the staff of the city of Eastpointe do to run it on a daily basis. It's easy to come and sit on the dais for an hour or two at monthly meetings. It's something completely different to come in 40-plus, 80-plus hours a week and dedicate your heart, sweat, and tears to the functioning and the running of the city. And so I want to, kind of as my Christmas gift, just say thank you to all of our city administration and staff, as well as to Mr. Albright. I appreciate your candor in answering all of our questions, even though sometimes you might not be ready for them. I guess we keep you on your toes, but thank you so much for your leadership in that regard. Ms. Walton, words are inexplicable how much I appreciate you and your staff. It doesn't matter when I have had contact with you all have done a stellar job, and I definitely appreciate, I don't think enough light is shed on that. You know, as the Board of Commissions, we get to kind of be the face of it, but you all really make it happen. And so I appreciate you all. Thank you very much. That being said, I want to say to this board, I appreciate you guys and the time that you spend, even before we get to these meetings, to fully engage, to fully read through all of the material, to make sure that when you come here, we are able to have a very engaged discussion, a discussion full of good knowledge, and that you take your role on this Board of Ethics seriously. I think it speaks volumes to the community, and I hope that our fellow residents will see that we do take our job seriously. We are trying to make sure that we proceed in the most effective and efficient way, and that we don't just make decisions haphazardly, because there are actual lives of people involved in the decisions that we make. So I appreciate each of you. To the members of public who have come and sat with us tonight, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. We appreciate your support. It's nice to have a meeting and it not just be us. So thank you, and thank you for challenging us, even for those who submit complaints. Thank you for employing what has been put there to be employed. While we might not like, I'll be the first to say, you know, I don't like it when people complain. I'm one of those people that I'd rather take my time and do it right the first time than have somebody come back and tell me I got to redo it. So, but that being said, systems are in place for a purpose. And so thank you for bringing things to our attention where we can tidy up and just make sure that this system that we are running in in the evidence of the city of Eastpointe runs effectively and efficiently. That being said, Merry Christmas to everybody, and I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Support?
Calling of the roll?
Board Chair Muniz,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sasek,
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd,
Yes.
and Board Member Tubman.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Bishop Lloyd.
Yes, sir.